Welcome to the GAB Talks by the Independent Press Award. I'm your hostess, Gabby Olzak. To participate in the 2024 Book Award competitions, please visit independentpressaward.com and New York City BigBookAward.com. Today, we will be chatting with Kori Reed, author of Men in the Middle, Conversations to Gain Momentum with Gender Equity's Silent Majority. Men in the Middle earned a distinguished favorite in the 2023 New York City Big Book Award for both the career and cultural social issues categories. Kori spent 15 years in corporate communications at various Fortune 500 companies and an additional 10 years as a corporate vice president at ConAgra Foods. She's an expert on domestic hunger, corporate philanthropy, and cause branding. Kori has been honored with the CEO Award, Chairman Award, and Spirit Award at the respective companies where she worked. She is now a strategic communicator, author, speaker, and facilitator. Kori is originally from Chicago. She holds a bachelor's degree in journalism from the University of Missouri-Columbia and a master's in communication from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Kori's mom to 4 adult children, 2 men and 2 women, and she joins us today from Omaha, Nebraska, where she resides with her husband, Mike. Congratulations, Kori, and welcome to the GAB Talks.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. I so appreciate this opportunity, and it was a thrill to be acknowledged for this work that I've worked on for 5 years with passion. So thank you.
Well, you can definitely tell it was a passionate work. You interviewed men across corporate America about gender equity in the workplace. So let's get started from the top. Who are men in the middle?
Yeah, so I think that right after Me Too, that we had extreme views in the media. Like, it was great discussion to have people raising the bar on normalizing this conversation. And then what happened is I noticed that we heard the stories of men in the news that were doing egregious behaviors. And then we had some men that were advocating for women, but really this majority of men that I worked with every day, were silent. And so if you think of the bell-shaped curve, we have the extremes, but the men in the middle are the ones really in the middle who really I found were not saying much at all. And in the interviews I learned, Gabby, they actually had a lot to say.
So why do you think that men are so reticent to speak up about gender and gender equity? And how can we, as a society, sort of alter their sense of vulnerability and encourage them to participate in the conversation?
Yeah, I think you hit on it really well, that word vulnerability. I think for men told me when I interviewed them that they thought gender equity was a women's issue. And what it really boiled down to, what I was fascinated at the end of the day, is that these men actually believed in the business case for diversity. They totally understood that more diversity in the leadership positions, in particular women, would increase innovation, financial returns. They understood that. What they didn't understand, first of all, is what that meant for them at the end of the day. So we have what we call like the surface level conversation that's happening where we get the business case, but what's happening below the surface is there's some fear, there's some uncertainty, and it's a lot of ambiguity. And in a very general sense, that made men uncomfortable from speaking up. And the other aspect was the concern about if they said the wrong thing, would they end up being in the news or lifted up as a showcase of not doing the right thing?
Yeah, it is kind of scary. In fact, Kori, you said a really interesting quote. To get men to be part of the solution, we might have to acknowledge that they face issues too. And as you mentioned earlier, the interviews took place shortly after the Me Too movement. I think many of us, specifically women, are really surprised to hear that men face issues. What are they?
Yeah, this is the part that's fascinating too. And I'll tell you, Gabby, since doing this, I've talked to women friends who are like, oh my gosh, Kori, why are you even saying this? We've been oppressed for years. I've talked to men who said, Kori, you're not a man, you can't speak for us. But it really is that point of acknowledging that we all want to be seen, heard, and acknowledged, right? At the end of the day. And I think that the research shows that when it comes to work-family balance, men are just as concerned. More men miss dinners than women, and men are just as concerned. They're just not socialized to talk about these issues. We know that men commit suicide 3 times more than women do. And so there's a lot of pressure that's happening on men and the stereotype of what a man should be. And so the whole aspect of bro code, other aspects happening, that if we don't acknowledge those issues, then my fear is we can't open up and have those conversations and really change the narrative that this is not just a women's issue. This is for men and women.
Definitely. Now, your research notes, you have a lot of really interesting data, which I'd like you to share. Your research notes that men hold nearly 75% of the C-suite positions, CEO, CFO, CIO. And you suggest that gender equity segue from a women's issue to a leadership issue, which would encompass, of course, men and women. But how do we get there?
Yeah, so I think I appreciate you mentioning that data. That was one of the questions I had. Well, first of all, when I said, why aren't men speaking up? And a good friend of mine challenged me, Kori, don't make assumptions, ask. Always a good idea, right? Not to make
Yeah,
assumptions,
sure.
ask. But then when you look at the data, you're right. Numbers differ 75 to 80% of men in C-suite positions. Therefore, they influence policy and day-to-day decisions, probably the most of any group. And so that's my piece of, gosh, how do we get them engaged? And so really what my book was all about is this massive invitation to really invite men into the conversation, because there are benefits for men too. When we think about gender equity, even things like the ERA, other aspects, even if you don't believe in the ERA, even if you don't want to go that extreme of that piece of it, the idea that men and women, I wrote my own manifesto, Gabby, and I think what I say is men and women are heroes alone, superheroes together.
Yes, I have that quote. I was going to ask you about that. He said, men and women are both stakeholders in gender equity. They are heroes separately and superheroes together. That was fantastic.
Yes. And I think we're designed differently, right? I think even research shows from a leadership standpoint, we have different traits. But the neat thing is leadership is also a gender neutral issue. As a matter of fact, research lately shows that women have a slight edge for the characteristics over men in leadership, but really,
we know that already.
Yes, Gabby.
We've known that for years.
Exactly. And I think that my view is, if this is an uncomfortable space for men to talk about, I want men in the conversation. I have two sons. We mentioned I have two daughters and two sons. And I want both my daughters and sons to have the opportunity to pursue what they want to do and have these conversations so it's not uncomfortable for them. And so I think if we don't normalize these conversations, and that's why every chapter in the book ends with key points and questions, just to get that conversation going. Even the last chapter, Gabby, I talk a lot about things that men said that I would say are not rocket science here, but it's really acknowledging that men do have views on this and they're not talking about it. But if they're in positions of leadership and the majority of leadership positions, then I want to find a way to invite them into the conversation so we can change that narrative going forward.
Absolutely. So what surprised you most during the interview process? Was there one particular interviewee that impacted you and really stood out?
Yeah, there's a couple, but I'll tell you the one that made me laugh probably the most. Not when I was calling the men, I was a researcher. I was asking them questions. We had a question guide. I didn't respond, then I just listened. But after I hung up the call, sometimes I had to say, that made me think a lot. So one of my favorites is a man who, when I called him, he said, oh my gosh, I've been waiting 18 months to talk about this issue. And it kind of made me step back, because I thought, wow, stereotypically, now again, I'm using stereotypes here and just to illustrate a point, that in a corporation, and I worked in many, that men talk over women in meetings, men are not bashful from speaking up in meetings, etc. And so I found it funny that he was like, he had something he wanted to say and didn't speak up. But then he was very enthusiastic and he wanted to talk about it. And I thought, wow, if there's ever a champion that could be, there's a person, but he doesn't have a state venue to say it. And when I asked him later, hey, why didn't you speak up? His answer was to me, well, I guess nobody asked me. And I found that fascinating. And you can see throughout the book, and even in my title, I'm all about creating conversations, especially conversations that I would say people are uncomfortable with or avoid, because I think that's where, in that discomfort, if we can work through that, then we can make change. And that's really what I'm trying to promote here.
Kori, you're a journalist, a communicator, and a collaborator with extensive corporate experience, as we said in your bio. What particular thing or things inspired you professionally or personally to tackle this issue?
Yeah,
Mhm.
I've worked in large consumer packaged goods companies, and I always am fascinated by consumer research to really understand where people are. I think we often make assumptions based on our own life experience, and given the um, the broad depth in media today about diversity and inclusion and how we talk about that, there's that has become even a controversial issue. But I'm really drawn by perspective taking and understanding others' perspectives and views on issues. And so when I asked one of my friends in market research, I asked her, I said, gosh, I wonder why these men are silent. I've worked with these men every day and they're great guys, but they're not saying anything. Well, we're all at the water cooler talking about everything that is relevant to this issue. And that's when she challenged me not to make assumptions and ask. And I thought, what a good reminder that being inquisitive, asking questions, and then listening is always a good skill set to develop if people want to find common ground. And I think that's the place. At the end of the day, I might not agree with somebody, but the opportunity to listen and hear their perspective does enrich my life, and I hope enriches theirs, so that we can both just have a better understanding going forward. And that's kind of driven me, I would say, even from my younger years, before I even went to college or anything, about understanding that other side.
Well, that was my next question. So, during your tenure in Fortune 500 companies, what was the number one takeaway that you learned?
Yeah, I think that corporations are made up of a variety of people. And I would say, yeah, let me take it back to my marriage and I'll go back to corporation. So even with my husband and I joke around that I can say apple and I mean the fruit, and my husband thinks about a computer, right? And that's sometimes the way that people think.
Yeah.
And that happens in companies too. And so I'm sometimes amazed that as a communicator, I'll tell you this, part of my job has always been to how do we develop messages that help people align to a goal. So whether it's a sales goal, whether it's cost reduction, whatever it is. And as a communicator, I think the big win is when you walk away and people are saying the message that you said. You're not saying, oh, I created that message, but they actually got it. They're repeating that message. They understand what happened. And I think that can take some time. And so I really think as a communicator, understand those moments when I fully was clear. I thought I was fully clear. And clarity is something that's very important to me. And then I walk away and somebody has a total different interpretation. I thought, wow, I missed that one, or I need to go back and make sure I'm understanding this or have some clarity. So that has been a driver throughout my career. I think that's a piece where sometimes I'm trained in something called DISC. It's just a different communication styles. And it's interesting that oftentimes I find it's just the style we have in the way we communicate that really leads to different interpretations. And we really do kind of have a common ground, but it gets kind of muddled up. And we have to have, on my view is, how do we have the patience to really work with each other to understand where we're coming from?
What do you think that the biggest misconception, Corey, is about gender equity? Because I don't think that society as a whole really gets what that means.
No, yeah, and I think I appreciate this question so much because when I started writing the book, someone said, "Wait a minute, you're talking about Me Too, and then you're talking about pay, and you're talking about promotions and other pieces." And I said, yes, Me Too just happened to be a time where probably men were always silent about gender equity, but it was a time that was highly elevated, at the height of Me Too, that you notice the differences between men and women talking about the issues and their experiences. Because certainly, as I acknowledge in the book, men have experiences too. And actually, men harassing men is also a real issue that we don't talk about. And it leads to other things like I mentioned, mental health issues, suicide, other pieces. And so I think that the whole aspect of gender equity is that this is for men and women. It is not just about women elevating or men. It's not a win-lose situation. I think that I put in the research some traits that men have in general, again, and the zero-sum game, the idea that one has to win and one has to lose, is a trait that is stereotypically, again, ascribed to men. And I think the big thing is it's not a win-lose. This is a win-win situation. if men can also express their views, what is happening, what their experience is, it allows them to be truly who they are too. They don't have to live up to some stereotype or some aspect that's not really them, but they're living up to a stereotype. And so I think that's the biggest misconception, that really gender equity is a win-win. There's a lot of research that shows even investing in women for village returns and community aspects gains, companies financially, but also I think that men can gain too. And so if we change that narrative, it's if anything for me, it's about this is a win-win.
So Kori, you talk a lot about corporate research, but you're a mom, you're a woman, as am I. Based on your extensive research and interviews, what's your call to action for society as a whole? And what recommendations can we take as the little people down here to elevate the discussions about gender equity?
Yeah, I love this. One of the, when I've had some people read the book, sometimes even moms have said to me, hey, I didn't think about asking my son about this. And I think, if anything, having those conversations at the dinner table, whatever venue you have, to open the conversation, to talk to men and women and ask questions. How are they feeling about this issue? When this happened to women, it's not just about women, but how did my sons react to this situation? I put the story in the book, and you probably saw this, where we were having dinner one day, one of those rare moments where all six of us could be together at the dinner table and the kids were younger. And I had been a working mom my entire kids' career, my entire kids' lives basically. And my daughter said to me, "Well, Mom, what if we don't want to be a working mom someday?" I'm like, "That's okay." And she said, "Well, what if I don't want to be a man-hating feminist like you?" And that's the moment, Gabby, where I said, "Oh my God."
Categorize you as a man-hating feminist.
Yes.
I would say that you're informed.
Yeah, it was just a really interesting moment. And she is a wonderful child that I have. It was just a moment. She was in high school, but I think about that a lot, because what I said to her is, look, you can choose the life you want to do. That's the beauty of, we advocate for this as a leadership issue and win-win. I'm not dictating how you choose, but I would never want my sons, I looked at them, to say, I'm not a man-hating feminist. I believe feminism is about advocating for both genders, and so that we can truly be who we are. So I do think having these conversations with our sons, asking our sons how they're feeling about situations. I joke in the book a little bit that the F word is so uncomfortable, but it's not the F word we think. It's feelings that people don't want to talk about.
So
And especially for men. Especially for men.
Especially for men, because they have to deal with, as you alluded to before, toxic masculinity, which is an issue that they face on a daily. But maybe that's your next book, Kori, that you can tackle.
Absolutely. And I like to clarify too that people, it's not that masculinity is toxic, it's that the stereotypes we've put on men make it toxic. And so that's
exactly. I think that needs to be renamed, because I think that is the connotation, toxic masculinity, that being masculine is toxic, but that's not at all what that means.
No, and I love the researcher I looked at. He called it the man box. It's this, that we're putting people in a box, that this is how you're supposed to behave. And I think for men and women, when we put those boxes around people, it doesn't allow us to freely express who we are. And we want people to bring their best selves to every situation. And that's, again, that win-win situation, where when we look at gender equity as a leadership issue, that allows people, I think, to bring out the best of who they are, regardless of their gender traits.
For sure. So we were just talking about your family. So Kori, Men in the Middle is not your first book. Now, this is a lot of fun. Share it with our listeners and viewers, the first book that you wrote in collaboration with your husband, Mike.
So it's called Zag Zig Parenting, and it's misadventures of a career-driven mom and a stay-at-home dad. And I'll tell you why I wrote this. It was right after I read Sheryl Sandberg's Lean In. One of the insights she shared is that young women in their careers were giving up on their career before they even started, because they wanted a family. And I thought, wow, I've been able to balance both. Now, granted, there were trade-offs, and I will be clear on this. This book is because my husband was a stay-at-home dad for 20 years, and it allowed me to do a lot of things in my career. But I think I write the stories in there more, and they poke fun at me, honestly, Gabby. There's some stories I'm like, oh, I'm embarrassed. For example, because my husband was the primary care person, when the doctor would call me, because the mom was still the first on the list, she'd
Right.
say, "How much does your child weigh?" And honestly, I would say, "Wait a minute. The dog's about 50 pounds. I think they cooked about 35 pounds." And they would ask me a ton of questions, Gabby, because they're like, "Is
That's
this really the
great.
mom?"
That's great.
And so that's so I think I wrote that more, not to say that you have to have a stay-at-home parent, but more so to say, let's normalize. Really, my whole thing is through conversations, let's normalize um, these other scenarios that we have such a, the June and Ward Cleaver vision of life is still that stereotype is still true, and it holds people to this box. And what I want to say is let's normalize other conversations that allow both men and women to be the best they can be as they were born to be.
Absolutely. So, Kori, this is sort of a fun question. If you could choose anyone notable in history to have a conversation with about gender equity, who would it be and what would you discuss?
Oh my gosh. So I'm a big fan. I put in there the book of Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Oh, yeah.
And I think part of it because, a pioneer of her time, right? Some of these issues that she was addressing, and the first case she took, and I put this in the book, the first case that Ruth Bader Ginsburg took in a big way was for a man who could not get benefits because he was a caregiver for his mother.
Yep.
And the IRS had defined caregiver as women. And so that was amazing to me. Like, she took it on. She knew then, by advocating for men and looking at this as not just a women's issue, but an equity issue for all, that we would gain more benefits. And that was years ago. So what a pioneer. And I'm hoping in some small way that I'm just continuing that work moving forward.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this was really a fantastic book. So it is important, and it's important work. Who should be reading this, Kori?
Yeah, I think men and women, particularly I targeted toward people that work in corporation. But what I found is friends that don't even work in a corporation, what they've called me back and said, "Wow, I didn't think about things this way." To me, Gabby, I mentioned earlier, that's kind of one of the best compliments when people say, "Oh, I'm thinking of it differently." Not because I think I'm a rocket science at all, but one of my purposes in life, I think, is to help people see things in new and creative ways. And if that creates a conversation for change, then that is such a compliment to the work that's put forward. In addition to the awesome acknowledgement that this has been bestowed, and I really appreciate that. It's that aspect of people that are looking for a different perspective and how we can make progress, and doing it in a way that doesn't alienate one group, that helps us come together.
Absolutely. You're a gifted communicator, Kori. That's so obvious.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Are you working on anything now?
So stay tuned.
Oh boy.
There's some passion, I think, around, and I think you can appreciate this, Gabby, that when we parent children in their 20s, they're an interesting aspect to parent.
Yes.
And so
Absolutely.
anytime that I feel that I have conversations with other people and I feel there's a common concern or problem we want to solve, that piques my interest. So it's always along the lines of creating these conversations that help people not feel alienated, to feel part of the conversation, and to invite people in, because the only way we can make progress and gain momentum is by having the conversation, not avoiding those.
That is a lesson to be learned by all. So, Kori, where can we purchase Men in the Middle and learn more about you and your work?
Yeah, thank you. So it's on Amazon.com. So Men in the Middle is on Amazon. And I have a website. My name is spelled a little differently. It's Kori. So my website is KoriReed.com, KoriReed.com. And I would love people to give their comments. I think even if people don't agree with me, Gabby, that's the whole point. I just
That's
want to
part.
start a conversation. Exactly.
Yeah, that's the best part. So, any last thoughts about this important issue that you'd like to leave our viewers and listeners with?
Well, thank you. I so am thrilled, first of all, for the acknowledgement of distinguished author. But what it means to me is that there's something here about content to read and inspire new thoughts. And so I really hope people pick it up, to read it, to have that conversation in your own home, at the office, wherever it is appropriate, to really raise the bar and have a conversation that will make a difference in the future for that next generation.
Wow, Kori, this was so wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today. You've given us so much to contemplate. We look forward to more work from you. I hope you come out with another book specifically about raising kids in their 20s. That sounds like fun. Thank you so much, Kori.
Thank you. I so appreciate the opportunity and the acknowledgement. Thank you.
Absolutely. On the next GAB Talks, we'll meet with Judy Lannon, author of 9 Days. This is your hostess, Gabby Olzak of the GAB Talks. Until our next podcast, keep on reading.